World War I, 1914. Bam! Thought of as the single great war for its toll on human life and destruction, but it wasn't the only war of the century. It all started thanks to colonial rivalry, arms races among European powers, and diplomatic tensions. Two opposing groups formed. First there was the Triple Entente, which was Russia, England, and France. Opposing them were the Triple Alliance, or Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. The Ottomans joined the Central Powers, Italy switched sides, Russia was knocked out of the war, the United States arrived at the party late, and trampled Germany, and the war was over. The Ottomans joined the Central Powers, Italy switched sides, Russia was knocked out of the war, the United States arrived at the party late, and trampled Germany, and the war was over. Peace failed as the Treaty of Versailles focused on the English and French, prevented Russian participation, did not reward Italy, crippled Germany, and caused the essential collapse of the Ottomans and Austro-Hungarians. Nationalism happens as a result of the war, and regions like India and the Middle East move towards feelings of a need for independence as a nation. Italy and Germany are grumpy, so they go fascist. Propelling themselves by propaganda and intolerance, revolutions occur in Russia, Mexico, and China. Communism takes hold in Russia and later in China, and Mexico experiences freedom from Spain and political reform on land, economy, and education. The year is 1929, and the Great Depression begins. Nations had loaned money and wanted to be paid back. Tariffs were high, and unemployment in Western industries declined. President Roosevelt initiated the New Deal, and Nazism rose, and fascism spread. In the 1930s, Japan militarizes, and then controls China. Stalin and a totalitarian state rises in the Soviet Union. Latin America reacted with corporatism rooted in fascism and some military government. The industrial workforce is the new thing. Now, Germany, Italy, and Japan have gone from grumpy to extreme nationalist to militaristic. Japan attacks Manchuria and is kind of brutal there. The Nazis use blitzkrieg and successfully take on Europe. The 1940s brought on the Holocaust, which was mass murder of Jewish, Polish, and people seen as different. 12 million died. 6 million of them were Jews. The United States and Britain countered Nazi gains, toppled Mussolini, and defeated Germany by 1945. With the atomic bomb, Japan was out of the war, so we demilitarized them. The Cold War started in the late 1940s over territory between the US and the USSR. Nationalism rose in European colonies in Africa, and a pattern of decolonization and independence started, which was complete by the late 1980s. Palestine was a mess, because Palestinians, Zionists, and Jews had all been promised territory there. Global sentiments were with the Jewish people. The US and Western European nations formed NATO, and the USSR countered with the Warsaw Pact. Consumerism rose, and capitalism and democracy are signature of the Western Bloc. Stalin dies in the 1950s. The Soviet Union experiences economic stagnation and collapses by the 1980s.
Now, over to Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Under the nationalist banner, many movements mobilized many people and promised to improve life after the Europeans left. Dictatorships and authoritarian leaders rose in the place of Europeans, such as Kwame Nkrumah and Gamal Abdul Nasser. Iran turned slightly extreme, and the apartheid state in Africa collapsed. Latin America was not critical in the war. The United States continued to dominate over the Western Hemisphere. Authoritarian regimes were challenged, like in Argentina. Cuba experienced a communist revolution under Fidel Castro, and Latin American population soared compared to the United States. Throughout this, women still aren't getting many rights. From the 1950s until the 1980s, the Pacific Rim grew significantly, economically. Japan quickly rose to the top, mostly by imitating America. Korea and Taiwan began to rise slightly later, by imitating Japan. Mao and friends took over China with their Communist Party. Aside from killing millions of people, Mao brought China into the future with a veritable industrial revolution. Then, after Mao died, a version of capitalism was introduced into the communist system. With Western fear of communism reaching its climax in the 1980s, the Soviet Union, or USSR, began to decline. Countries on the Eastern Bloc, or Eastern Europe, began to revolt against their communist captors. Most significantly, the final realization that the Union was collapsing occurred with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the reunification of Germany 1 year later. The process globalization spread technology and information, leading to the rise of terrorism in the past 2 decades. The most obvious example of this are the terrorist attacks of 9/11.